Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Karwaan. I am Ishan Sharma. And in this first Samvaadi conversation, I'm really excited to host Pelva Naik, one of the youngest and the most known Dhrupad singers in our generation today. So, welcome, Pelva. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this conversation with us.
Thank you, Ishan. Thank you very much for putting this together and inviting me over to this conversation. I'm really looking forward.
I started when I started listening to classical music 4 or 5 years back. I came across your rendition of Rag Basant Hindol. That one,
Hindol Basant.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's on YouTube, and I was mesmerized truly. So let's
Thank
start.
you.
Let's start with the conversation. Let's trace your family background. How was your family, and how was can you tell us about your father, your mother, your family a bit?
Yeah, so I grew up in a city named Ahmedabad in Gujarat, in India. And I'm the only child. And I grew up in a neutral family with just me and my parents. And then, of course, my extended family. I was very close to my maternal grandmother, who passed away quite early, who was a teacher, who had a school of her own, who was a dancer, who had also a background where she went through a very rich sort of a training in classical arts and literature and education and, deep philosophical background. And that's how I think then my parents are also artists and teachers and, very deep connection with the mother tongue, with Gujarati. So I grew up speaking Gujarati, grew up learning, the ways and richness of the Gujarati language, along with many other languages and arts. So listened to a lot of classical music, a lot of folk music in my childhood. Danced. I was trained into Kathak dancing much later, but before that and all throughout, I think I can say that the folk dance and the Garba, that we have, the traditional dance form of Gujarat, that was something which was a very central part of my being. You would always find me dancing as a child, doing Garba and singing folk songs and songs from different regions, excuse me, and classical music, of course, Begum Akhtar, ghazals, and less of Western, less of somehow there was bits and pieces of Western classical that I was introduced to, but I think it was more Indian and vernacular and folk, and yeah, so a lot of other, even cinema and painting. I mean, that's what I wanted to kind of take up professionally. If someone, we have this tendency that people would ask you when you're very young, what do you want to become? And I thought I would be a painter, or a photographer, or a dancer. Musician, I never said, because I always felt like music, you don't, what do you do professionally? Like, I really didn't imagine that I would be on stage, making music and play, performing or something. But I always knew that one would be singing. Singing brought great joy to me from since I was, I think, very small, a toddler. So somehow singing was very personal, but very, I think it was the most joyous, that it gave me the most joy as a child. So that's why I think one sort of kept it also quite close, and I didn't really want to say, oh, I want to become a performing musician or a singer or something like that. So yeah, that's how the journey was. And then went on to the Valley School in Bangalore, Krishnamurti Foundation India School. which kind of opened up a very different sort of a landscape for me, because you are on your own as a young person. You meet other young people, you know. The atmosphere, unfortunately, in Gujarat, in Ahmedabad, at that point of time, was not so accommodative, was not so rich in that sense. And that's the reason why I had to leave Ahmedabad and go to Bangalore. And, you know, because I wanted to do humanities, I wanted to study history, I wanted to study culture and fine arts and music. And somehow no school offered those subjects in Ahmedabad, surprisingly. So I went to Bangalore, to Valley School, and that's where I think, you know, just being on your own, and you realize that you are kind of an independent being, away from that sort of a comforting cocoon of your home environment. I got very kind of actually in contact with nature, you know, because the school that I studied was a very beautiful place with a lot of, with a forestation and jungle and lakes and animals. And so it was the first time when I came into contact with nature as well as Dhrupad. So the genre of Dhrupad was, you know, it was in my school that I got introduced to Dhrupad.
We'll explore those. But you know, you mentioned that folk music, folk songs were the first, in a way, the first introduction to music. And but how did you get introduced to classical music in your childhood? You mentioned Begum Akhtar and Ghazal.
Just listening. My father was an ardent listener, with my parents, but my father really listened and sang. My paternal grandparents were singers, you know. They also sang out the garbas at Navratris and a lot of devotional bhajans and all. Beautiful voices, both of them had. So, and then I think my father also sort of, received that inheritance of the voice and just singing as a very natural everyday activity in the household. So he used to sing much, and I thought my mother also had a beautiful voice, and she sang beautifully when I was a child, but I think she herself didn't know that, and she was quite surprised when I used to tell her that. But yeah, so there was that, you know, singing was a very central part in the family. And then a lot of, like I told you earlier, a lot of listening. So we had those cassettes, right, at that time, tape recorders, and of course radio was there. But radio came later to me, you know, when the FMs and all started. That's the time when I started listening to radio, and that was mainly Vivid Bharati, All India Radio in the nights, you know, those classical programs, and then a lot of Bollywood that I was also listening, you know, all like normal हमारा जो आसपास का जो स्कूलों में सब लोग सुनते हैं. So radio was, I was introduced to Bollywood by FM radios when it was introduced first time, I think in the late 90s. So, but before that, yeah, the cassettes, you know, there was so many cassettes of mostly classical music, Amir Khan Saab and Begum Akhtar, and my earliest memory of classical music was Malcolms by Konkana Banerjee. You know, it was very small. Father used to play that a lot. Then, of course, the Gujarati folk, which were sung by my maternal grandmother, my parents. So we all used to sort of sit together and just sing those. Then even Ashram Bhajanavali, you know, those just devotional bhajans and songs, and in Gujarati, and many of the Bangla Rabindra Sangeet songs, because there was a great influence at that time, even earlier in the 80s and 70s, of the entire movement of adapting Rabindra Sangeet music to Gujarati, many other vernacular languages. So that was there. So it was just a lot of listening and singing, and learning happened like that. And then I think when I went to school, and when I was about, I think, 10 or so, is when I started getting trained in Khayal by my school teacher. This woman, I still remember her, this very, very generous and kind and loving lady named Pratima Trivedi. So it was from her that I started learning Khayal. But that was also just fun, like, I just loved going and singing. So anyone would tell me sing this, I would start break into, singing any time. So it was just some more singing, and that's how I would just cycle down to my Khayal class and started learning Khayal, and then started giving those exams in Khayal and, Madhyama Pratham and Purna and all those theory. I love theory also in music. So yeah, that's how the whole exposure took
And you
place.
mentioned FM and radio, and in today's time, that also is, it's going to pass by very soon, and people are turning to podcast. And and you mentioned in the first answer itself that you were trained in Kathak as well. So, जो Kathak की training थी, did that have an impact on you as a singer as well at your early age?
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's movement, and singing is definitely very much connected to body movements. It is body. I mean, it's the body that becomes your instrument, and, it's a vessel. And I think, yeah, I mean, the rhythmic aspect, of course, the sense of rhythm, which I think received earlier with all the garba and, all the heech. We have something called heech in Gujarat. And I think these, from my mother, I really, really received the very, very authentic ways of doing heech and garba, where the sense of rhythm is very primal. And these are really, really beautiful aspects of, which is getting, I think, lost in Gujarat. So that, I think, was there imbibed, like what is moving your body along with the rhythm, and why are you doing that? Which is something similar that you do when you're singing. Why are you singing? You're singing to sort of really go beyond the expressions that a normal conversation can, derive. So it's so for me, Ishan, and for any human being in that sense, there is no separation, whether it's dance or whether it's music or whether it's painting. So I was fortunate that my whole journey began like that, instead of separating and saying that, okay, dance is different. Dance is all to do with about body. Music is all about voice. Doesn't work like that. Painting is all about visuals, and you have to look at it, and your hand has to have sort of acquire certain techniques, and you have to be gifted painter. It's not like that. It's how you want to express something, and that what you want to express, that content is always the same, whether you express it through dance or music or poetry or art, painting or cinema or anything, or you just live that. You just live that, and you sort of express that through your relationships, how you live. So yeah, so I think dance definitely played a big role in that way. It has really given a lot to how I visualize and how I look at a form in Dhrupad or in music, or how one listens to music, or how one sort of relates to rhythm, a percussion aspect in music. And beyond that, I think how do you really sort of imbibe singing in your body, I think is something that I learned in dance. And then what happened, in fact, it's a nice thing that you raised it today, because it is now that I am realizing that, I got that there was at some point of time when I was quite too focused, which is good, I was, too focused with to my training in Dhrupad. Then when I was my time with Ustad Sahab, I think that dance aspect somewhere got lost. It was always there. Inside, it's always there, even now. But I think the moving your body and the movements and, somewhere got lost. The fitness aspect of, where you have to be really fit to be a dancer, somewhere got lost. And I think I shouldn't have done that. I should have somewhere or the other continued keeping one's body, as agile and as alive as a dancer would do, as a musician. So I think today I'm trying to get back to that in a way, to really get back to that freedom of that a body has experiences in a singer's body. I think it's very important to really derive that fitness and that freedom and the breath, the way the breath moves when your body is dancing. Similar sort of state of being, I think I'm trying to really go back to. So yeah.
You mentioned that while you were being trained by Ustad Zia Fariduddin Sahab, that you became more sthir in that sense, or the dancing body went away and it lives within you, but not outside. But do you think there's a certain temperament that is required to understand, to learn Dhrupad, as you mentioned in your statement just now?
I would say that definitely the music, the style that the Dhrupad music kind of has, has a certain way of perceiving sound, definitely. And I don't know about sthir as a word. I don't know what we really mean when we say sthirta, because sthirta is a state of mind, state of being. So, and that kind of sthirta, if you want to kind of derive and imbibe, it can happen anywhere, even in the most noisiest, so-called noisiest of surroundings. So I wouldn't say that Dhrupad is a genre of music which really sort of, generates, or in its mulbhut swaroop, in its most in its central characteristic, in its nature, innermost nature, has that kind of a sthirta, so to say. But it definitely has a very sort of steadiness to it, dhruva. When the term dhruva means steady. But again, I'm also still trying to really understand all these definitions and terms, and I really haven't got into scholarly aspect of it, or I haven't really sort of taken help of books, so to say. I'm just trying to understand it in my own practice and in my own, how I'm experiencing, and how, going in the root of the nature of that being in that moment, rather than really understanding it intellectually. So, but dhruva, I think, means something which is steady, but yet it is changing, it's moving, it's journeying in that space. It's like the moon. So the moon, because the moon is so far away, and there's such vastness of the universe, around it, that it feels like the moon is sort of hanging out there in the space, if you look at it from the Earth's point of view. But we must realize that when we're looking at the moon, or when we're looking at the stars, they are continuously moving, they're continuously chalaman, and I think that's what a style of Dhrupad somewhere, like especially the alap, really tries to convey. That if there is a note going one note to the other note, it is even though it may seem so steady, it has so many dynamics and so many frequencies around it, You know, it's almost carrying this whole universe around it. And then it's moving within that space. So that quality of steadiness is what we are talking about in Dhrupad. And that's what Dhruva somewhere, or I also, I think, the term Dhruva defines itself in that manner. So what was the question?
It
Where
was
we
about
began from?
does a person
Yeah, the
need
stillness, the
yeah.
steady.
Yeah.
So I would say that it is in this process that one derives that state of steadiness or stillness or whatever it is. I was sometime back, I was introduced to black metal, you know, Attila and all these the early black metal masters, and black rock, and I found there's a tremendous sense of stillness and steadiness that one can really form if you're listening to it. It can be so-called, you know, when they say Dhrupad is extremely meditative. Even rock, metal, pop music, jazz can be extremely meditative. You listen to African percussions, you listen to, you know, all kinds of even new world music. There is, if you want to look for stillness and steadiness, it can be found anywhere. In the middle of the war, I mean, people have, you know, achieved enlightenment. So I don't think a genre of music has a particular nature that should be imposed on it, that it is very quiet and still and steady and peaceful and happy. And I think it is a state of being. And it has the capacity. So Dhrupad as a style has the capacity to really, you know, take you there to that place. Definitely, it has that.
You mentioned a phrase that is, you know, of being, being that's metaphysical in some sense, if we can call it. How did, because you studied at a school that was established by Jiddu Krishnamurti, one of the biggest names in, you know, Indian philosophical traditions, modern Indian philosophical traditions, if you can call it. Uh, how did your understanding of being defined by Jiddu's idea of the being?
Uh, I mean, so Jiddu Krishnamurti's philosophy was something that I got introduced first time when there was a book, you know, that I saw in my house that my father had brought in. And then there were conversations about his education system and his philosophy. And then, of course, the school that I went into. And what first came to me, and what I first sort of picked up as a young person about this man's writings and what he was trying to say, was that truth is a pathless land. You know, that sentence was something that first struck me. And then as a young person, you ask, what do you mean by a path? And what do you mean by pathless? You know, and what do you mean by truth? And that's when I think the journey began, saying that, okay, that means that there is truth. There is something called truth, and then there is something called sort of state of non-truth, or, you know, when you're lost, when you're. So what do you do when you're lost? What do you do when you're in search of something? You question yourself. And Jiddu's constant sort of perseverance towards questioning yourself, questioning everything around. And when you say questioning, you're not saying you're sort of going against it, or you're doubting, or you're constantly sort of rebelling, but just going into the root of something. So, and that was something, there was a connection with my own journey already, because I was extremely interested in going into root of things. whether it is in nature study. I was doing a lot of nature study back in school with watercolors. So like just detailed work with leaves and flowers and stones and things like that, landscapes and inks and watercolors and all. So, and then there was music also, where I was interested in really understanding the nature of sound, the nature of notes, the nature of rag, because by then I already had done a lot of khayal. So I was quite much interested in the raga system and the Indian classical music system. So going into the root of something was, it really got me hooked to understanding more of what Jiddu Krishnamurti is trying to say. So that about questioning and the fact that truth is a pathless land, that really frees you, that really frees you. That means that your journey is individual. Every individual have their own journey. And that means that there's a lot of work. There's freedom because it's a pathless land. You can run anywhere, you can explore, you don't have to really follow a certain authority. You don't really have to follow exactly what someone asks you to do, but you have to question it. You have to observe it. You have to observe yourself. The observer is the thing observed. That's another thing that really was something that got me thinking as a young person. So that means that if it is so much freedom that a pathless land offers you, that means with that comes a lot of responsibility. And these were the sort of, elements, and these were the, what do you say? These were they really influenced me, these ideas and these sort of ways of thinking and evolving as an individual. So there were a lot of discussions. That was a very beautiful thing about the school back there, that there were a lot of, everyone was quite open to discussions and dialogues and questioning. In an education system, I think that is the most important thing. That you are freely questioning something and trying to look for answers together, rather than creating this system where there's hierarchy and where the sort of elders are always just telling the young ones to follow a certain rules and norms, and that's it. You don't really question why those norms and principles are followed, So yeah, and then there was so much more to just, Krishnamurti's education system.
Yeah.
Why did he choose to ultimately realize that it is the solution lies in education? And education doesn't merely means the education that you really see, where just academics and institutions and where there is separation between the teacher and the students, but education where relationships are really understood. What does it mean by relationships? By how you relate, and how a young individual is, ultimately an individual, is sort of a growing up to be an individual and not just someone whom you merely just sort of, impose your baggage as a humanity. So yeah, his methods of education really has influenced me in that sense.
I think that continued when you pursued, training under Ustad Ji, that Guru Shishya Parampara, that hierarchy was invisible in that sense, which is informal education between a teacher and a student, and
Yeah,
yeah, you were saying
I
something.
think, I think now I realize that I survived in a system called Guru Shishya Parampara, which is almost talking the opposite opposite in many ways. It has its own richness, you know, it has its own sort of, it is very rich because, you know, you have someone, you have your teacher, you know, whom you call guru. And that relationship is sort of, has no match in that sense. You know, it's like a friend. It's like a friend without any sort of outfit of, you know, it's हम उम्र भी नहीं है और हमारे से बड़े हैं, हमारे से बहुत ज़्यादा जानते हैं, there is more experience, yet there is this, you know, give and take, which is so equal in that sense. That's how Guru Shishya Parampara is. It's this very unique relationship. But when I said that it's so contradictory to the ways of what Krishnamurti and, you know, that his philosophy is trying to say, that, you know, there is an individual and there is, we're all equal in that sense, and there is no hierarchy, and every structure is being questioned, you know, which makes sense. Like you question every structure, every system, whether it is marriage or Guru Shishya Parampara or anything which is sort of has those limiting, you know, which is limiting in many ways to human freedom, you know, to the individuality. So in that sense, there was hierarchy, you know, out here when I came to this system, when I entered the system of Gurukul system, and you know, where the ways and rituals were very different, where the whole definition of respect was very different. Yet, you know, I think because I came with that very, very open and sort of a very clean and very vulnerable, but I really didn't enter into the Guru Shishya Parampara system or enter into learning with my teacher with that outfit, you know, with all those conditionings, like things like you cannot question. I was questioning all the time. Also, as an individual, I was, though I was very submissive, you know, I would really not want to not please my elders. I wouldn't want to be the one who is being scolded. I always want to be the one who is being praised. So, and I was one of, I think there were more boys and there were more male students around. So I always found myself the only girl most of the time back in Bombay. So I think I was quite secure in that sense with my own being, you know, with my whatever the image that I had gone there with. So that's why I think the hierarchy didn't really take over me, you know. Also this whole thing of like the submission, the surrender that they talk about in Guru Shishya Parampara. I think I really did not see meaning of just blindly, you know, sort of diving into something like that. But yet I really realized that there is a great sense of relating, you know, when it comes to your master and your teacher as a student. So the deep sense of love and respect naturally emerged, you know, with your teacher. At the same time, you also started, you know, really looking at the whole dynamics of that with a lot of vulnerability and not so much of conditioning, you know, but more so like, yes, you know, there is love already. There is so much respect already. Then why do I have to go out of my way and say that, oh, you know, here is my master, he's a guru, he's the god, he's everything, or she's the guru, she's the god, you know. So this whole जो इसका पूरा महिमा जो किया जाता है वो genuine क्यों नहीं हो सकता? Why does it have to be so out there loud, you know? why is there so much of sense of control there, and why it's being imposed rather than just being it in its most organic, natural state. So this was there, but I think I survived because of that, because of my already that I had already developed this, sort of I can say a shell in a way. I did have that protection around me that I think I'm going to relate to the human being that this person is, Ustad is, not anything else. I'm going to respect and love the human being, the musician, the teacher that this person is, and not the social outfit that he's been given, in order to sort of carry on that hierarchy, which I don't really believe that is necessary. That hierarchy is not necessary.
And another important thing that you talked about is the spirit of questioning that you जिसे आपने जिंदा रखा when you were training under Ustad. And that's quite missing in our society today, and that is something that we all must understand and must learn, the spirit of questioning. You met Ustad Zia Fariduddin Saab in a school competition, if I'm not wrong, in an event.
No, it was a workshop. It was a workshop organized by Kabir Jaitirtha, my teacher from Valley School. So it was a workshop that he came for a few days, I think for a week or so, if I don't forget. And that's where I met. And then I attended that workshop.
And how was the workshop was done, and you went to the school where you, so how was that training? Because I have heard that Zia Faridin Saab was quite a strict teacher in that sense. So how was the training like? And you mentioned, I think somewhere, that you love cooking, that something that we didn't talk about in the beginning. And he also used to teach music through cooking. So how was those anecdotes, if you can explain those?
Well, yeah, so I don't think Ustad Zia Fariduddin Dagar was a strict teacher in that sense, and I don't know what it actually means by strict teacher, but the process of teaching and learning definitely does demand a lot from both sides, and it is a hard working process. It's a process where you have to work really hard. It's very intense when it comes to the exchange, of the vidya, or whatever you call it, these elements that are so intimate in that sense. But I came to Ustad, I think, in his late last years of his life. He was in his 70s. He passed away at 82. So I was consistently there for, you can say, 10 years, with Ustad Saab. So I think it was, I had heard at that time that Ustad used to be such a rigorous teacher when he was in his 50s and 60s, where all the senior Dhrupad musicians around me, who had learned from him in Bhopal, they had learned in such a way that no one now ever gets that chance anymore. And I had heard those kind of things, like, which is true, because when he was in his 50s and 60s, Ustad was at his most, he was like a fireball, even as a musician. And he was a gentle master also, but he did have that fire. And I think he really, at that time, when he was in Bhopal, when he was teaching the Gundechas and Bhavalkar Sahab, that time, I think he was indeed a very, very rigorous, and that you can say, strict teacher. So I heard all those things when I came, and it seems like Ustad was much mellow, and he was much more, he didn't really bother whether someone really wants to learn, they will learn. Like, be around me. If you get, you'll whatever, if you have the capacity to derive the music from me, you will stay, or otherwise you will get lost. So he was in that state when I came in. But But so I did wonder, like, oh, he's not, he doesn't want to. Sometimes a few felt like, no, I don't think he wants to teach me. I don't know what the hell am I doing here. What am I doing here? I could have just gone to a university and studied fine arts. But then slowly one starts realizing that, it's both destiny, and it's also there is something that I need to stay and learn from and relate and love and really carry something within from. So it was a gentle association, very gentle in that sense. And there was yes, like you said, there was cooking and there was gardening and there was traveling, because Ustad used to, at that time, used to take flights if we had to go for concerts. And some of us would travel in trains and buses with his tanpuras. And then, there would be this whole sort of, everything would sort of revolve around the teacher and the cooking. Wherever we would go, we would cook for him. And he was so much more older, So almost we were like, I was this little grandchild, young girl. Yet there was this constant flow. You could feel there was this constant flow of, there was no hierarchy. After a point, I realized that it was like this friendship, and it was this bond, and like a family, like a tribe. And that's when the exchange started taking place. So my way of learning was indeed very different from the way I'm sure these seniors have learned, and how people must have learned in the earlier times when my teacher was younger. And also, I think what I realized, that I was very fortunate to really, because what happens is with the masters, with the greatest masters, what happens is as they age, their work becomes more and more refined, more and more rich, more and more dense. And that happened with my teacher. So I think what some of us in his last days, what we really could get to listen to and learn, which was very little compared to his earlier days, what people must have received, in terms of quantity of music and experiences. It was very little, but I think it was one of his most truest and most vulnerable and most open and most refined and expressions that I think we were fortunate to really be witness to. And that is something that I feel I am very fortunate to carry, with me, and really work more and more on that.
And because we are talking about music, and Zia Fariduddin Saab and you also are from a gharana called Dagar Gharana. And you mentioned that, it's like a close knit tribe and a family. So those who are watching us might wonder about the meaning of a gharana. So can you talk about what is a gharana, for those who are new to classical music?
I think how I understand it at this point is that it is a perspective. It's like a language in a way. Gharana, literally, if you look at it, Gharana means ghar. It's like there's something under one roof, where you sit and take shelter. So here is a style of music, which has a certain specific perspective about music and the way you approach that music and how you express it. What language do you use? What styles do you use in order to express the music? So I think it's very simple. Gharana is a kind of it's a perspective. It's like you're looking at music. You're looking at one rag from a window. There's a place you're situating yourself at a certain point, and you're looking at that music. There's someone on the opposite side, which might be different, another gharana, but that person is also looking at the same thing that is there in the center, which is that rag, the music. So it's a perspective, which is, I think, which you can call a gharana.
And why did you choose Dhrupad? And Dhrupad is in common sense, and the knowledge that is there in public is like a male dominated, quote unquote, male dominated space, and we do not really see many, in that sense, female vocalists in Dhrupad. So why did you choose that? And there are other forms of singing like Thumri and Khayal, and why didn't you explore those?
So I really didn't choose it somehow. If Thumri came to me, if some ustad or some, a person, if Rasulan Bai or Siddheshwari Devi came in front of me for a workshop in Valley School, maybe I would have done that. It happened to be Ustad Zia Fariduddin Dagar, and I chose that. So it came my way, and I really didn't have, like, no one gave me choice ki ye hai, ye hai, ye hai, ye isme se bhi choose karo. I didn't have that. It was there, and I was like, this is it. Maybe I think I can spend a lot of time doing this. I want to learn this. I didn't even think of like performing it or becoming a musician. I don't even know what it means, but becoming a musician, because you don't really become something. What you do is you practicing it, you're learning it, you're expressing yourself through that medium. So here it was, Ustad was there, Dhrupad was there, and I think there was a possibility for me to go on learning there, with him. So that's how it happened. It could have been anything.
It was almost
If it was a folk
accidental.
musician, I mean, I wish I really could do that. I wish we had more sort of folk musicians, given that kind of a sort of a respect and, set up in society to really make their mark and really teach children like how the classical musicians do them. I would have done that also. But this came in. And then, of course, Dhrupad really, really also drew me to its element because of my, like I told you, I really enjoyed details. And I could see that, here you have and so much freedom with the syllables that you use in Alap. The language that is used in Dhrupad, it is so intricate. So that really drew me to it. The intricacy of it, the bariki jo kehte hain na, that you go in depth. You sort of really dive deep into one note, understand the nature of it. So, and elaborate. There's a lot of time. There's no hurry. So you take your time and really unfold that rag. Rag Swaroop. So rag was rag and their Swaroop. This whole subject already, I was very, very much interested in it. I was always, it was of a great interest of me to really understand the nature of rag, different ragas. So I think it just happened in such a way that there was a teacher there, and such a remarkable teacher. So that's how Dhrupad happened. Yeah, I didn't really have to choose.
As I said, it's almost like accidental to you. जब हम घराने की बात कर रहे थे, in Gharana there are three parts. There's Gaiki, there's Bani, and there's this instrumental part of music. And you are from the Dagar Bani stream of the Gharana. Can you talk about these three parts of a Gharana? Because I missed that when we were talking about the definition of Gharana.
No, so as far as I understand, Gaiki and Bani are the same. Gaiki is a way of singing. गाने का एक तरीका, गाने की रीति, गाने का एक sort of a way, a vehicle is गायकी. कि ध्रुपद गायकी, ख्याल गायकी, ठुमरी गायकी, and Geeti is, so it seems there were 5 Geetis. in the ancient times. Shuddha, Bhinna, Govarhari, Vegaswara, and Sadharani. So Gitis, you can say, it's not just Gayaki, like Gane ka tarika, but Giti is much larger, sort of a platform. It is Giti is it incorporates the musicality of it, so it is the musical vehicle, the entire vehicle, the music, and in the style, musical style, that you can call Giti. I think you can, I am a very novice when it comes to really defining terms. I'm not a scholar at all. I'm just singer. I'm a vocalist. I'm a student. So, but this is how I understand this, कि दोनों में इतना फर्क नहीं है. गायकी, गाने का एक तरीका, उसको गायकी बोलेंगे, और गीति इस पूरी जो म्यूजिकल जो पूरा apparatus है वो है. तो साधारणी गीति जो थी उसमें से डागरवान came into being, so साधारणी गीति was the amalgamation of all five gitis which I mentioned, and from there came the Dagar Gharana. So Dagar Gharana में जो जिस तरह से गाया जाता है उसके origin आपको पाए जाएंगे साधारणी गीति में. So and then instrumental aspect जो है वो तो that also is, I think, part of the Giti itself. So खास कुछ इतना कुछ इसमें फर्क नहीं है, but you can still check with the scholars.
So definitely. And जब हम वाणी की बात करते हैं तो जैसे जो मुगल times था, during the Mughal times there were 4 kinds of banis. There was Nohar Bani, Gohar Bani, Dagar Bani, and there was this another, I'd like to refer to my notes. Then there's Sans, so एक जो कंधार बानी, sorry, and there's this phrase कि जोर जोर से कंधार गावे, मधु बोले से नौहर लेवे, सांस बड़ी है गौहर की, अलापचारी है डागर की. That's kind of a phrase in Hindi. So can you explain these distinctiveness in these 4 kinds of banis?
It explains, the verse itself explains it so well, So, but like again, I'm telling you, these are the हमारी generation जो है. I think we were not fortunate to really witness these gitis, the musicians, and I think many of them are seldom sung, or they are not really deciphered in order for us to really understand कि नौहर कैसा होगा या शुद्धा कैसा होगा या बाकी जो भी आपने गीतियों के बारे में बताया, तो how that must be. But I think one thing we can really very clearly see that, like I said, they all had their own different perspective. They all had a different language. Boli, Bani इसी को बोलते हैं ना. Bani is Boli, language. So they were all trying to very exclusively, in their own manner, define rag, music, and they were exclusive in their own way. इसलिए अलापचारी डागरवाणी को बोलते हैं, because somewhere the domain, the sort of battalion of alapchari was given to Dagarwani, because that simply, if I can imagine that the musicians of this particular gharana seemed to have mastered that way, or seemed to have really adapted in their own nature, in their own being, in their own way of life, that way of expression, where there is more sort of longer alap, where you are unfolding the rag in a more slower manner. You're using these syllables and researching and sort of evolving the syllables that are used, phrases that are used in the alapchari of Dagar Gharana. So they were, I think, must have been getting evolved with every generation, So ek tarah ka, it's very similar to science, where it's very focused. कि भाई वो प्रोटीन के ऊपर काम कर रहे हैं, तो then there is a specific term given कि प्रोटीन है, या there you're working on मक्खियाँ, तो फिर मक्खियों की different species पे ही काम करते रहेगा वो पूरा जिंदगी भर. And then you sort of master what it means, the whole organism of makhi, you know, or like a specific botany mein jaise hai. It's so I think it's a very एकदम फोकस रह के फिर आलाप के ऊपर ज्यादा काम हुआ डागर वाणी में. वैसे ही अलग अलग गीतियों में, अलग अलग वाणियों में, अलग अलग चीजों पे, you know, different they were like sort of became more and more exclusive in that sense. And also variety, you know, that time I think the patronage also sort of started emerging in such a way. There was a lot of show and pomp, you know, when it came to the courts and the court musicians. So it was like different gharanas, and certain gharanas were sort of patroned by certain emperors and imperial courts. So wo variety rakhna, you know, to have that diversity and have that variety was also very much central to our culture at that time, you know. So that's how I'm trying to understand that.
There are so many questions now. एक सवाल जो मेरे मन में आ रहा है, it's I'm not sure if it's those who are familiar and are scholars of Indian music मुझे माफ करें अगर ये सवाल काफी बचकाना लगे, बट एक जो जनरल पर्सपेक्टिव है ध्रुपद को लेकर वो है कि इसमें ऑर्नामेंटेशन नहीं हो सकता राग का, लेकिन आपने आलाप के बारे में जैसे बताया, ऑल सिलेबल्स आर एक्सप्लोर्ड इन देयर ओन, यू नो, in their entirety in some senses. So how do you break that myth कि नहीं डागर में भी ornamentation हो सकता है राग का? And if, because people are here, if you can also give us an example of a राग.
हाँ, तो मुझे तो बिल्कुल ऐसा नहीं लगता कि एक तो सबसे पहले तो let's explore what you mean by ornamentation. Ornamentation माने क्या? एक ऑर्नामेंटेशन को एक कंडीशन करके आप बोलेंगे कि हाँ मुर्गी लिया या यू नो खटका जैसे ख्याल में है, या अमुक किसी तरह का गला से घूमना चाहिए, उसको ऑर्नामेंटेशन कहते हैं. किसको ऑर्नामेंटेशन कहते हैं? एंड आई थिंक ईच ऑफ अस, each musician, each person will have their own way of putting across what they mean by ornamentation. You know, it's like your personal choice. You know, कुछ रंगों का जैसे हम aesthetics, everyone have their own way of understanding and implementing aesthetics in their lives. So, and like we talked about earlier, that, you know, there are different gharanas, that means there are different perspectives. So definitely the perspectives are going to be different, you know, when it comes to ornamentation or aesthetics. So, and scope nahi hona is not possible, because if you are creating something, you know, if there is a creation through the medium of sound here in this context, then there is form. And when there is form, there is that space where you can really, you know, use your aesthetics and ornamentation, if you want to call it, or, you know, expression in your own way. And I don't think there can be a lack of it in any way. Yes, sometimes what happens is that if certain things are so intricate, it may feel like it didn't really, it wasn't really sort of evident, you know, in terms of ornamentation or something. But I think kya hota hai ki ek culture, you know, sometimes popular music, when khayal became more popular, its ways of ornamentation became more popular, so that when you listen to some very intricate ways, you know, when certain aesthetics are used in alapchari, then you may feel like it is limited, but it may not be. But one thing I would like to say, which is my observation, is that Dhrupad, and especially in the alap and its syllables, you know, the way the syllables are used, it is such a form that it really has the potential to reveal the full nature of, you know, the person who's trying to practice it. So if there is limitation in that person, if there is some kind of rigidity within you, then it will reveal itself. So you may make the grammar rigid. There is a possibility of it. But at the same time, it can become really vast. So it's a very flexible kind of a medium, I would say, the grammar in Dhrupad. You can बहुत ही narrow भी बन सकता है, or you can really make it just all about just counting and just about very very sort of a narrow raga swaroop where there's just a few notes and you उसके इर्द गिर्द आप रह के बहुत ही safe रह के भी आप काम कर सकते हो उसमें. And it may sound very rigid, but at the same time, this music has the capacity to really magnify that rag and really make it like a huge, wide landscape, which is endless. The way you can use time and space as a medium in this grammar, in these syllables, it is remarkable. It can just sort of open a new world to you every time, For example, if there is re na, there is re and there is na, and you can just use it like ni sa re na. But if you want, you can just open it up through the medium of time and space, and you can really explore the dynamics of re na or re na. This is just an example, and then you have re na ra na na, so then it's extended even more. You have te ta ra na, you have ta ra na na, you have a ra na na, a na na na. And here again, the body, you start connecting with the body centers, with where the emerges from, where na is more nasal, where re is, where ta is, where ta is, where a is. So it's like it's very much to do with how you're breathing and how you are feeling and how you want to really reveal yourself as much as you can reveal yourself. So limitation, I think, takes place in the being of that person, in the person. If you want to limit yourself, you can be limited. And that's why I think I would say that no art form, no musical form can be rigid. If it is art, if it is expression, it cannot be rigid. It's in the person. And that way, Dhrupad, it can not be rigid. And looking at these syllables and the grammar, it can open a vast, space to explore and do ornamentation and create your own rich aesthetics.
So, as you're saying that there can be n number of permutation combinations in Dhrupad as well. We can experiment.
Yeah, I mean, it has its own grammar and structure, and it has its own rules and regulations and aesthetics to it. But it is very, very, it really, really opens up, quite vastly.
Yeah, and we were talking about Alapchari in Dagar School, and all these Dhrupad renditions, compositions are 2/3 of the composition is Alap, the build up, and then there's Bandish, which is 1/3 of the whole composition. तो जो आलाप है उसमें अगर आप उस आलाप के बारे में बताएं कि ध्रुपद में how do you explore आलाप and a rag through आलाप?
So like even in Khayal and Dhrupad, like in both, rag swaroop is central. So if you've chosen one rag, then you're kind of trying to really, really very, very intricately express and explore the nature of that rag. Uska jo swaroop hai, you are almost trying to sort of evoke that rag into life, and unfold it slowly by describing it, But so in Dhrupad, how you do it is that there are 3 tempos within which you do the alap jari. You do the alap. You begin with the slow vilambit tempo, and then you move on to the middle tempo, which is called the madhyalay alap. First, it is the vilambit alap, then madhyalay alap, and then the drutlay alap, which is simply slow tempo, middle tempo, and fast tempo. It's also called alap jod jhala because this was the term, I think, adapted from the instrumental aspect, where, jodana, which is like you trying to jod, you are trying to bridge the 2 tempos, which is slow and the fast. And here there's a middle tempo. And that's a simple classic Dhrupad recital, alap jod jhala. And then it is followed by the composition, which is a pad from the Dhrupad. There were many poetry from different cultures, especially during the Mughal era. There was a lot of amalgamation of Farsi and Sanskrit and Braj Bhasha, Farsi Braj Bhasha pad that you find, and many Braj Bhasha poems that are sung and composed in Dhrupad in different tals. So then percussion joins in at the end. When the pad comes in, the percussion comes in with pakhavaj, So then you improvise along with the percussionist within that set tal cycle. So that's the main setup, with the Dhrupad recital. And what you do in alap, like I said earlier, it's these words, aranana, rana, teteri ranana, rina rana. These are words which has really evolved through generation to generation. And I think today, if I'm not mistaken, because that's what I feel, today the syllables that we are using to sing and play are, I think, the most evolved, the most refined, because it's itne sare generation ke baad uske upar itna काम हुआ है, उसके ऊपर इतना विचार हुआ है, और आज हमारे हाथ में हम लोग इसको गा रहे हैं. तो they are very evolved, and they're full of possibilities, to really unfold a rag, like I just explained earlier. So the grammar is a very crucial limb in Dhrupad alap. How do you use that grammar? How do you use the aesthetics around it? Pronunciation and the diction, and all that really is adhered to, and the rag swarup ultimately. So like how I always like to explain that rag is like a person, so you kind of describe that rag, and when you're describing it's a very intimate, it's a very personal process that's taking place, because it's got layers and layers and layers to it, just like a person. It's very complex. So every time you're going to sing with a rag and sit with a rag, it's going to be different. You're spending time with that person at that time, and then you're describing it to the audience, or to the, you're just describing it. Sometimes not to anyone, but you're just doing that for the need of it. So the rag swarup, like I said, is very central, and it grows every time. So every time there is a recital, every time there is an alap, you are sort of journeying ahead and, exploring and spending time with that rag, and describing its nature, describing your relationship with it.
And I think that's what you meant, that the grammar, the formal structure of the rag will remain, but one can always, break away in
the sense that it is a personal process, right?
Yes.
So Yaman will remain Yaman. It'll be Nire Gama Dhani Sa. It'll be all its characteristics and all its frequencies and shrutis, and everything will be that. Because it's like, it's Ishan. So Ishan will be Ishan. Aapka jo structure hai, aapka chehra hai, aapki awaaz hai, wo to wahi rahega. But when I'm talking about Ishan, I'm going to talk about what is my friendship with Ishan, how much I know, what am I trying to understand. And then slowly, aaj hum pehli baar mile hain. After 5 years, it will be different because probably I would know a little more about Ishan. So it's like, this is just an example. But when it comes to a rag, it's even more intimate, because there's so much of yourself and your being and your experiences of your life and your thoughts and views about existence and everything, your relationships, everything goes into what you're describing in that rag, through that rag. So it grows, it definitely grows, and that's why I think also rag has the capacity to uh, give you that vessel where you can really go within and be honest and really sing the truth of it. Because if you're going to sing the truth of it, then that means you're really also singing the truth that is within. So I think that also is a very crucial process, part of the process during the alap that takes place. But I think, like I like to keep repeating that it is not just with Dhrupad. It can happen with anything. It can happen by cooking. It can happen when you're sweeping the floor. It can happen when you are nursing someone. It can happen when you are making shoes, So yeah, I think it's any creation.
Yeah, and in Dhrupad, there's this Nom Tomalap that if you can explain about that.
So I think nom tom alap ये जो term है वो थोड़ा misconstrued हो गया है. I think it is एक तो सबसे पहले तो nom tom जो ये शब्द है वो तो ध्रुपद ग्रामर में है ही नहीं. So it's good that we are clarifying this because nom tom आपने सुना होगा तराना में. नोम तुम आपने सुना होगा कर्नाटक में भी ये शब्दों के कुछ प्रयोग किए जाते हैं whether is नोम तोम ता नोम these phrases are used. तो मेरे ख्याल से क्या हुआ होगा कि तराना जो अदारंग सदारंग से जुड़ के आया फिर पॉपुलर हुआ बहुत and then कर्नाटक गायकी में भी ये these phrases became popular. So I think when people must have heard the Dhrupad alap, these syllables that are used are very similar. Anana, tetarana, taranana, रीना नूम आता है, नोम नहीं आता है. तना तुम, TUM, तुम. तो ये बड़े सिमिलर है इसके प्रोनाउंसिएशन. तो इसलिए शायद नोम तोम आलाप का जो ये टर्म पॉपुलर हुआ वो मेरे ख्याल से हो गया, ऐसा मैं समझती हूँ. एंड आई थिंक you can also approach many other musicians, they will also clarify on this. तो नोम तो आलाप तो ये है ही नहीं. तो लेकिन आलाप जो है वो तो मैंने आपको I just explained to you what alap is all about.
That's an important clarification. और मैं मेरा सवाल अगला यही होने वाला था कि I have heard Tarana in Khayal rendition, especially Pandit Rajan Mishra from Banaras Gharana. They have this wonderful Tarana on YouTube that we can also link in the description of this video later. So do we have something like that kind of composition with which have sounds of percussion in that sense? Nom, taran, tam.
Yeah, like I said, we have re na ra na te ta ra na ta ra na a ra na te ri ra na री ना रन ए रन तार नन रीना नूम रन तना तुम, ये है. तो इसी से फिर then from this is the grammar upon which you build the alap in the Dhrupad style.
Because we are talking about the structure of Dhrupad and Dhrupad being the, if not the oldest, but one of the oldest form of Indian classical music. For those who are new to Indian classical music, there's this term layakari in Dhrupad.
Mm.
So can you talk about layakari, because I'm sure many of us are not aware of layakari in Dhrupad.
Lay,
Different
Kali,
types of.
lay is sure. So lay is the rhythmic aspect, simply put, and like alap chari is the rhythmic, alap aspect of it, the description of alap, rendering an alap, unfolding the alap. Alapana, meaning to sort of convey something, to tell a story in a way, to really elaborate something, express something, elaborating in an elaborating manner. So similarly, lay, kari, is the approach where you are sort of expressing and describing and elaborating the rag swaroop through rhythmic aspect. It's just simply that I would that's how I would define it. And then of course there is more to it, which there is so much material available, out there. But I would look at it in a very simple way. Laikari is simply the rhythmic elaboration within the alap. And Laikari, even in composition, there's Laikari. So it's a technique also, so to say, the technique of a sort.
And while talking about Drupad, there's another word for us that is coming in my mind, Damar. So do you also
Dhamar.
Dhamar? Do you also sing Dhamar? Do you practice that? And if there is a difference between Drupad and Dhamar, and you can elaborate on that.
So Dhamar, actually originally Dhamar is a tal. It's a 14-beat tal. And what happened was that the style, it kind of evolved a slightly unique style of singing those particular compositions which were set in the 14-beat Dhamar tal. And because it was, sort of especially in Dagar style, the Dhamar compositions had a very unique sense of timing to it. And so what I've also heard, what Ustad Zia Fariduddin Dagar, which is Ustad Sahab, my teacher's father, Ustad Zia Fariduddin Dagar's father, he was an expert in the singing the Dhamar style. So the way you sort of come on some in Dhamar, and the way you elaborate, the sense of timing that were, explained and explored in Dhamar kind of stood apart compared to other Dhrupads. Dhrupads meaning the padas which were sung in Chautal, Sultal, Jhaptal, and many other tals. So Dhamar, that way the singing style was so unique that it was, and I think it became quite popular also. A lot of, in the imperial era, a lot of dhamars were created with Hori descriptions of it. And if you know the imperial courts Hori in Rajasthan, especially the imperial courts Hori was a very big festival. So the descriptions and visuals of Hori was really, really kind of depicted in a very rich manner in Dhamar compositions. So I think it must have become very popular also. So that's why it kind of had its own unique place, and people started calling it Dhrupad Dhamar. Or also to sort of stand Dhamar more sort of evidently out there, so that you know what you mean by Dhrupad. Dhrupad is that form where Dhamar is also sung, probably. So is tarah se Dhrupad Dhamar ek jod shabd ban gaya, popularly. But actually Dhamar is, now Dhamar is also, Dhamar can also be sung in Khayal style. It's just a 14-beat cycle within which a composition is sung. So it was Dhamar was sung in the Dhrupad style itself, but then because of its, क्योंकि क्या होता था धमार इस तरह से गाए जाते थे, almost like for me I always felt as if you're visualizing something in a slow motion, especially in the Dhrupad style. बहुत ही अद्भुत उसका एक visual बन जाता था. because of the long 14 beat, and then if it's slow, you can imagine that if you have a division of 14 beat cycle, and then it is described in a so slow manner with a lot of memes in it. Dhamar had a lot of memed. Memed is going from one note to the other in a very slow sort of a motion, a very unique manner of singing. It's a technique. So meem बहुत इस्तेमाल किए जाते थे धमार में. So that's Dhamar.
Thank you so much for that introduction to Dhamar. Or you talked about that slow. और मैं जब हम तैयारी कर रहे थे इस session की, I told my friends that we are going to host Pelva for this conversation. Firstly, they are not people who are into classical music, so they said कि Dhrupad और जो classical music that is very slow. That's always in the vilambit tal, and we feel sleepy while we are listening to it. So there's this complaint among the young generation, and many of them are watching this right now. So would you like to address this common perception that music, in classical music, especially Dhrupad, is too slow in that sense?
I think when they're saying that, they must be talking about alap, because yes, alap is slow, you know, and yes, I mean it is a way of listening, and it's a way of sort of it becomes kind of a way of perceiving music in some way. Some musics are slow, some music are fast, and rhythm is something which appeals to the masses, which it's a truth. And it's beautiful. I mean, there's nothing wrong about it. Rhythm is, I mean, if you look at even folk music, and even one of the most primal music of this world has such, you know, in its core, you see that the rhythm is in its core, you know. So I think to a human being, first thing that really kind of catches its being is rhythmic aspect or fast tempo. So that's why it appeals to the masses. It kind of wakes you up, you know, and it's something very, very easily kind of comes to you as an element, you know. It's like the wind. The wind blows onto you, but if it's water, you have to go to the water body, you know. So and water is sort of slow. It's but not necessarily. You have waterfalls also. So Dhrupad has the jhala aspect is nice, and it's quite fast. You have fast compositions also in Dhrupad. I mean, if you look at the Darbhanga Gharana in Dhrupad, which is very percussion oriented घराना, बहुत सारी गिनतियां होती है उसमें, दुगुन तिगुन आड़ कुहाड़, you know, चार गुण. तो ये सब they are very rhythmic oriented, they are very fast. तो ऐसा नहीं कि ये जो एक इमेज है कि स्लो है और बहुत ही नींद आ जाता है, वो तो I think it's up to the person. What is it that your being, your body, your mind is seeking at that time? And most of us, I think, get drawn to fast and rhythmic and loud, and this is contradictory to it, but I'm sure it'll wake you up after some time if you really kind of are sensitive to what it's trying to say and what it's trying to explore, and you know. So
whenever they ask me for music recommendation, that is why I send them Dhrut Teen Tal, Bandish and Dhrut Teen Tal, so that they'll feel that high tempo. I was talking to somebody who teaches music, and he mentioned two terms which I think I didn't ask him that time, but I would like to ask you that those two terms and the style of singing, Abhog and Sanchari in Dhrupad. So, and he said that not many people sing Sanchari and Abhog these days. So can you talk about those two styles?
Yeah. So पहले के ज़माने में जब पद compose किए गए, you know, when the pad were created, bandishes, compositions were created. Bandish is the composition. Bandish माने बांधना, किसी compose करना. What is composing? To put things together, you know, where there's tal aspect, there's rag there, there's poetry there, there's what else is there? Yeah, rag, tal, poetry is sort of woven together, tied together, and that's why it's called bandish. तो बंदिश पहले के जमाने में 4 bhagon mein, lot of bandishes you see which are composed in Dhrupad are in 4 verses, 4 stanzas, which is our Sai, Antara, Abhog and Sanchari. So now it is less performed, I think. I don't know why, probably because of time constraints. And also, you know, uske jo improvisation ke tarike hain. Like, for example, all 4 are not improvised in the same manner, just like they are not composed in the same way. So what happens is that sthai is sort of commencing. You know, you're entering into a story in a way, because it's a poetry, and there's first stanza which is sthai. So it sort of builds the plot in the sthai. If I can give you an example, very simple example of there is a composition in Rag Megh, where it talks about, in sthai, it's talking about the arrival of monsoon. So it hasn't started raining yet. In sthai, it hasn't started raining yet. In sthai, it's talking about describing how the clouds have kind of enveloped the earth, and how black, dark they are, and how heavy with water they are, and the Indra has brought them in. So it's kind of building that mahal of what happens before it starts raining, you know. So that's happening in sthai. And then it is also composed in that way. It's also composed with the middle octave notes. You know, you still don't go into the upper notes. Then in antara, and this happens mostly with all the compositions which are set in 4 stanzas. Antara, there is kind of the main message, or the climax, so to say, happens in antara, where the upper notes are more tar saptak centric. Everything is, so you use a lot of upper notes. And also in the description in poetry, it is that specifically in this composition, it is in antara that the main thing is happening, which is barish, rain, you know. So then it's describing how musaladhar, barasatam musaladhar, hot prahar char, you know. So musaladhar barish ho raha hai, and all 4 prahar it is raining. So now it's pouring in antara. So the main subject, main thing that's taking place, around which the whole composition is revolving, is happening in antara, which happens mostly in antara. Then abhog mein kya hota hai? There is a sense of like not conclusion, but returning back to where you began from, you know. So that's how it is composed also. So for example, there is a Bhairav में एक composition है जिसमें अंतरा में ऊपर के notes काफी सारे जाते हैं, जैसे सत के प्याले में धर्म भर पियो रसना स्वाद लेता लागी रहत जिय थारी ज्ञान. ये वापस आ गए हम स्थाई में. But when abhog begins, it's like you kind of going a little more deeper into the subject matter. At the same time, the climax has happened, the main message has been conveyed. So you're also returning back to this thigh, but in a different way. So abhog इसमें कैसे जाता है? तनकारी मा रे मनकारी ज्ञान मतनकारी, you know. तो सा सा धा इस तरह का जो composition किया जाता है. जैसे मेघ के जो composition में I was telling you that abhog. Now what happens in abhog is it's talking about after rains. Bundana dharani dhari sabahi ke ichha puri, you know. So there's this पूरा अंतरा में ऊपर के नोट में सब काम हो गया जब बारिश हुआ मूसलाधार अंतरा में all upper notes, you know, and then you come back and you're describing that हाँ अभी हो गया, now you're sort of winding up, sense of return, you know. That's what abhog is mainly what all about. तो abhog में जो improvisation होगा वो स्थाई की तरह नहीं कर सकते आप, you know. That improvisation then will have to be in that way. You'll have to, every time you come back to some, you'll have to have that sense of abhog to it, that sense of retrieving, returning, you know, after deriving the message from antara. You can't even do too much of improvisation on abhog in upper notes. जैसे अंतरा में आप तार सप्तक में improvise कर सकते हैं, abhog में आप वैसे नहीं करोगे. So the whole approach of improvisation is also different. So I think ये सब डिटेल काम जो है वो ज्यादा, you need more time also in concerts for this. I think that's why also it has decreased, you know, singing all four notes, all four stanzas, abhog. And sanchari mein, again, now sanchari is conclusion. So sanchari will, most of the sancharis that I've heard goes again very similar, they sound very similar like antara, where again they go back to the upper notes, to tar saptak, and then there is the, in the end there is a name of the composer or the poet. तो इस तरह से 4 stanzas में गाया जाता था, elaborate होता था, you know. There was a lot of scope to just take your time and elaborate these poetries.
But thank you so much for those wonderful examples, and being greedy a little, we would ask you in the end to sing for us a small bandish if you can, to conclude the session. But
sure,
before that, you know, we have talked about the Dhrupad, and let's move from Dhrupad to music in general. We have heard that ragas have many ragas, or most of the ragas are time specific. There's Rag Bhairav for early morning. There's Rag Bhairavi for morning around 8 a.m. Then there's Bhim Palasi. There's Bhopali in the evening. There's Rag Yaman or Lalit in the very early of the morning. That's 3 or 4 a.m. What is the logic behind these time-based ragas?
Yeah, so these were very, very well thought, you know, as I've understood them. And it was like a sort of a system, you know, and but it was never watertight, you know. It was not like a rule, as far as I believe, that you have to sing a certain rag in certain time. But at the same time, you know, like it is very deeply connected with the cultural connotations to it. Like India, you know, so in India we do have very, very strong sort of sense of winter, which UP ka jo winter hai wo bahut alag hota hai. You know, in South it's different. In Rajasthan it's different. You know, the winter in Kashmir is different. So similarly, the mornings in Banaras is different. The morning in Kanpur is different. Morning in, you know, Baroda is different. So I think it is also sort of reflecting that the experiences, you know, tangible, sensual experiences, experiences of the senses, temperatures, changing of temperatures, changing of light, and its effect on the instruments, on the voices, on the bodies. So I think, for example, जैसे सुबह के रागों में ज्यादातर कोमल ऋषभ का इस्तेमाल किया जाता है. So I think it's also because if you look at the instruments, you know, metal tends to take up high pitch in the mornings. रात को आप अगर तानपुरा को ट्यून करके बैठेंगे तो एक थोड़ा, and nights are cooler. So in the morning when you will you know, strum it, you will आप छेड़ोगे तानपुरा तो थोड़ा सा चढ़ा हुआ मिलेगा आपको. So that's why the Komal Rishabhs are higher, than the normal. So even the frequencies, the sas, and you know, they're elevated, sort of they're thoda sa chada hua hota hai rag, subah ka rag jo hota hai, jaise lalit hai, sohani hai, you know, bhairavi mein bhi. So I think it must have come from that whole, you know, perspective of कि अलग-अलग temperature है, अलग-अलग light, you know, visuals and feelings and experiences. लेकिन कभी watertight उसको नहीं मेरे ख्याल से किया गया था, because ultimately it's very personal. For example, जैसे मुझे याद है तिलक कामोद मैंने एक बार बैठे थे उस्ताद के साथ सीखा था एक बार, 1 or 2 lessons. I mean, we never had lessons, but like 1 or 2 seatings. And these were very, very memorable. I remember it was remarkable, this rag, the way it was opened, and it was in the mornings. So now in Tilakamo, there's an evening or night rag, if I'm not mistaken. It's an early night rag or something. So for me, whenever I sing Tilakamo, I get the sense of morning, because for me that was very strong experience of Tilakamo in the morning, early morning, 6:30, 7ish. You know, so it's very personal. I think at the same time, these you know, the ambience and the culture and the seasons do play a big role, you know, especially when it's coming from such a rich continent like India. So I think it's an amalgamation of all these things, this whole time theory that we are talking about. But जैसे आप देखोगे South में तो they have dissolved that time theory. तो क्यों ऐसा किया? That I wonder why they don't follow that. So and we still follow that. So मेरे ख्याल से personally I feel, and even I think my teacher believed that it's not it shouldn't be so watertight. अगर आपको रात में भैरव गाने का मन हो, and if you think that that's माहौल है, and if it's in the memory, if it is so strong, you can sing it. Why not? Why not? I mean, you question why not? तो वो दोनों है, पर्सनल भी है और ये सब चीजों का भी मायने रखता है इसमें टाइम थियरी में.
दो theories जो मैंने पढ़ी, first was that when I was reading about because I was very inquisitive, curious about why time-based ragas, और क्यों हम समय के अनुसार सुने as an audience, as a listener, why should we listen to rag? Because there are many playlists on YouTube with, you know, morning ragas, evening ragas, night ragas, ragas for concentration, and thousands of playlists are there. There was one theory that some ragas are associated with deities, Hindu deities and goddesses. So that is why, to invoke the goddess, to invoke the deity, they perform a certain rag in the morning or in the night.
I would say that it's a very personal perspective. जिन्होंने भी बोला होगा उनको definitely personally ये एहसास हुआ होगा कि, you know, because if you're really, you have that faith, and if you're following a certain element, a deity or a form, or, you know, whatever it is, it definitely comes, right? I mean, if you're thinking about COVID, and if you're singing Malkaus, what you're going through during COVID is going to go into your Malkaus. It's not going to be a Malkaus from some middle age, you know, times. So I think it's a personal perspective to what. I don't think you can associate rag to any one particular deity or an element or a form in that sense. Element, yes, sure. Like, you know, Meg, for example, it's a water element. You can feel that. But I don't know if, I mean, I feel that because I have my culturally, and, you know, my mind is already conditioned to that. And I do feel that, you know, कि जो उसका निषाद है, उसमें है वो water element, मेघ में. भीम पलास का वही निषाद, वो जो मेघ, भीम पलास also comes from the मेघ family, तो उसका भी जो निषाद है वो बहुत similar है. So ये experience से धीरे धीरे करके somewhere it has sort of created its own you know perspective about it. एक तरह का एक उसका नजरिया, you know, बन गया. But I don't know, I mean, if someone sitting in Japan would feel the same about Meg or about certain rag. Say, I don't know which rag you're talking about, but if there's someone says that it is related to a deity, तो फिर वो कोई Scandinavia में कोई बैठा होगा, वो will not feel the same, right? Because that for them that it's a different sort of a relationship with that rag. So they will maybe define it from, say, those northern lights, or I don't know what, you know. So I think it's a very personal thing what you associate the rag with. That's what I would believe.
Yeah, no, I read about Rag Bhairavi and Rag Bhairav and then Rag Shivaranjani.
But those are because those names have been given from the mythology. Now, Bhairav का जो image है वो divine masculine या शिव का भी image है. So maybe when we are singing Bhairav, in its origin, there must have been intentions of expressing the divine masculine or Shiva in certain way, but that is just a part of that. That doesn't mean that the entire Bhairav is just that. Wouldn't that be limited? Because then the Bhairav in me, the Shiva or the divine masculine that we associate with without knowingly and unknowingly, is it just that limited? I mean, there can be much more to it. No? I mean, it can be, it's like colors. Like you may associate certain object or certain rag with, say, white, but I may associate it with black. But ultimately, they are just associations coming from your memory and your experiences, and it's some very subtle sort of movements that are taking place by listening and creating these mediums. So it's not that limited. I think it surely may have those elements of it, but then it's also much more than that.
Yes, and I think this is something that should be understood by all those who are watching us right now. And I was also listening to Pandit Jasraj in conversation, I think with Sadhguru or someone, that he mentioned that the musicians take all these swara and these sounds are in the air, so time doesn't really matter. It's upon the artist to catch and to weave it into a rag. So
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
where do you see classical music going in today's time?
I think I don't know. In today's time, I feel like everything with art has become internalized. It's person to person. So I have a feeling that there is a lot of introspection going on collectively and individually with everyone, and that's why even within the classical music field. And I feel that what I feel needs to be shed in order to really take the truth and richness that classical music has to offer, to really take that forward. I think what needs to be shared is this might be controversy, but this pretends that it is larger than life, that this pretends that it is purest of the pure. Because everything in that sense has that, everything is a vessel, And I think this hierarchy doesn't make sense. That there is a music form which is the most spiritual, or there is a music form which is pure. What do we mean by pure? Purity is a state of being. Purity of thought? Are you talking about purity of thought? Are you talking about purity, technical purity? What is pure? What is pure? Some of the most, and when we and there are things like, there are folk musics, there are contemporary music, there's pop music. I deeply respect pop music, because there's no pretense there. It is what it is. It is trying to please the masses. It's trying to make people dance. It's trying to touch people. It's trying to sell. It's trying to make money. But it's out there. It's just not, it doesn't have a veil. It doesn't say, oh, I am special in any way. And here there is music which has tremendously, I mean, classical music, it has qualities which are very, very, it has possibilities. It does provide those vessels to really, really dive into the intricacies of human nature and expression, and really take expression really beyond its limits. But there is a lot of pretense, I feel, and there is a lot of hierarchy. And I think it is really not necessary. And I think it's somewhere creating a hurdle in its evolution in many ways, socially, especially, socially. I think anything which has hierarchy as its in its outfit, I think, is problematic, because it is creating imbalance, in many ways. And when it comes to arts, I think imbalance is something that is in a way, comes in the way of really saying something which is true. Inequality is something that comes in the way of saying something which is true, and we all are trying to really say something which is true, whether it's our truest expression of our being and being honest. So I don't think Indian classical music should be put in that pedestal of, it is the most sublime, and it is the richest. And I think anything can be, if it is, really expressed with its true being. So that's where I think we need to really question ourselves as a collective, as people who call themselves classical musicians, and audiences who are out there to support classical music. I think we all really need to understand and listen and create music and art as it is, with carrying the truth that it really offers, and shed all the other sort of superficiality to it.
So what you suggest is that we have to let go that hierarchy and that rigidity of the form.
Question, like,
Yeah.
not, there's no need, I mean, you can't just let go things like that. No, if you just start questioning that why are we making these separations and differentiations and hierarchies, what is the cause behind it? Are we trying to protect something? What is the fear? Is there a fear about something? Is there ego? Where is this coming from? Where did it start? When did it start? So, and is there a need to it? So, yeah, I think those are the questions.
Yeah, and that's where I put the fusion music that's going on these days, the Indian classical fusion, and how that is making classical music popular in some senses. And in popular culture, there's very recent TV series called Bandits on Amazon Prime, which has clearly made Indian classical cool among the young people,
I
and
see.
people that I was mentioning about, those who were complaining about Vilambit and music being slow, they really enjoyed that show, and they said, we love the songs of the compositions of Pandit Ajay Chakrabarti. They didn't know about Pandit Ajay Chakrabarti as classical singer, but when they heard, Nasiruddin Shah playing that role, and they really were quite fascinated by it. And that's where my second question leads to. How do you think we can popularize classical music among the young people? Because you also teach music to young people. How do you see that?
I would say that why do we need to popularize something? Is there a need to popularize something? And in that sense, I mean, if you look at it, it is popular. I mean, those who listen, So, and like I said, see, it's a language. These are like languages. So, जिनको वो बोलनी है, वो बोलेंगे. So I mean, do you want to popularize Hindi in Africa? No. you know, जो लोग हिंदी बोलते हैं वो हिंदी बोलते हैं. So if it classical music is limited, you know, into a culture. It's a South Asian subcontinental music. We have to realize that. And English music, I mean, everyone in this world is speaking English. So English music, pop music, when music which is created in English, that's why it's more popular, because it's like a universal language. That way, if you look at Dhrupad, it's quite popular. You know, I mean, those who really listen to it and relate to it, it really has that universality to it. So, hame as a musician, as a practicing person, I don't feel the need to like go out of my way and popularize something, because I would do that first. I would do that to be popular myself first of all. You know, कि मुझे ज़्यादा देखेंगे लोग, मुझे सुनेंगे, so that's one point. हाँ, तो उसमें you feel good, they're like, oh, I'm popular. So that way you can popularize music, sure, to become yourself popular. बाकी तो मुझे कोई ऐसा तो कोई, I don't feel the need to do that unless I'm the Ministry of Culture or something and I want to spread, you know, my heritage and my culture and all that, sure. But ये तो क्यों कुछ कोई चीज पॉपुलर हमें क्यों करना, हम कौन होते हैं किसी चीज को पॉपुलर करने को, अगर लोगों को सुनना है, it's like a, that's why I said it's like a water body. If someone wants to come, they'll come to that water body, be there, drink that water and go. You know, there is always a purpose behind seeking anything, any art form, or seeking it or creating it. तो जिस चीज को वो उसमें दिखता है कुछ अपना एहसास होता है कि इसमें maybe I will be able to express something, or this really relates to me, this really connects to me, they will come to it. And we are just a small speck in front of this vast world, you know, Indian classical musicians and Indian classical music. तो है popular जितना है उतना है, रहने दो उसको. That's what I would say.
No, that's an interesting point, that music is very personal, and that one must explore it by
and दूसरा क्यों मतलब classical music को popular करना चाहिए, तो फिर folk music को क्यों नहीं करना चाहिए? You know, there are some musicians in the deepest recesses of this world, no one knows, they're remarkable, तो उसको क्यों popular नहीं करना चाहिए? So, और हम कौन, I mean, who are we to really take up that? I think we just need to come together and be true in what we create, and be true in what we listen to, whom we support. And I think that's enough. और आज के ज़माने में इंटरनेट से सब कुछ पॉपुलर कितना हो रहा है. I mean, everything is, you and me, we are talking because of the internet. So popularity, internet is taking care of that. People are coming across all kinds of musics and all kinds of things, a little more than they should also, in a way. So, yeah.
That is very true. Internet does play a big role, and I would like to also mention the initiative by Darbar organization in quote unquote popularizing
They're doing
music.
a remarkable job. Yeah.
And you were mentioning about folk singers. So yes, there are people like Prahlad Singh Tipania in Malwa.
He's quite popular. I'm
Yes.
talking about those who are absolutely anonymous, you know, many women musicians.
Yes.
And we're talking about folk music. Thumri mein dekho, Purbi Ang mein, hum to sirf do chand naame jante hain. There are so many women who have just died anonymous and who are remarkable musicians. You know?
Very true. And my in this, I would also like to ask you, because we are talking about our contemporary times, and we are talking about art. In times we are living, practicing art is a very difficult proposition. Where do you see the purpose of art, and purpose and the place of an artist in today's society, especially in India, in contemporary times?
It's quite meek. I mean, say it's dark times, I would say. I would say it's dark times when it comes to real freedom of expressing. But at the same time, these are the best times to really go within and introspect. And you have that space, especially with the internet also. You can really have the one-on-one interactions, and you can be sort of, especially like you see now, there is hardly any work in terms of performance. The auditoriums are still closed because of COVID, and there are not many concerts, there are not many gatherings taking place. People can't really meet for bethaks and concerts. So in times like this, I think right now I would say it's a time to introspect and strengthen one's truth, and wait for sort of an opening where you can really sort of come out, where you have worked in such a way that one has kind of shed all those unnecessary fears and weaknesses as an individual who is trying to express something which is true and honest, and express it to its fullest, I would say. But collectively, I think less and less people are understanding why art is so important. But at the same time, I see that there is in young people, but a very small number of young people, where there is that movement which is taking place, where we are realizing that it is important to express through arts, and arts are ultimately going to be the sort of the most significant identity, to really revive, if you can say that, or really retrieve the lost sort of solidarity and strength that I think this country is in need of, as a collective and an individual also, in our own fights against, inequality or gender issues, or religious, freedom, or sort of your fight to even survive in that sense. So yeah,
Something that we were also discussing before this session. In today's situations and times, there's also a narrative that this is our heritage, this is our history, this is their history. There's this kind of othering, very it's very we can't call it nominal or very marginal, but
yeah.
there is this othering in society. uh, how does how do you as an artist explore that or understand that?
Yeah, sure. There is it. I think it's at its most magnified state right now. There is definitely this othering, and wherever there is, whether it is in collective, whether it's out there in politics or in sociology around us, or whether it is in our personal beings, our personal lives, personal one-on-one relationship, if there is that separation, when you see that there is othering, there is dividing, these tendencies and these qualities are prevailing, I think what we can do is, one just has to sit back and question first, is that where is this need to separate comes from? And I think it comes from deep fear of losing something, or a deep need to control something in order to not lose something, or it's much more intricate than that. So I think, yes, definitely there is these tendencies, and there is the ambience is very much, sort of, there is that vacuum, and it's quite it's almost like a battle between, the controllers and those controlled, being controlled, and the expression and the freedom that is being controlled. So I think we need to just question these, within ourselves first, and then it will reflect in collective. That and art do provide that, music does provide that. But again, it's like, how are you looking at music then? Are you dividing music also? Like what we were talking about earlier, that why is there need to divide anything? Why is there need to put, create this hierarchy? So why are we doing that? And I think the answers would come, and the answers lies in deep fears and deep insecurities and this resistance to oneness, despite all the conflicts and oneness despite all the divisions. So it's time to, I think, sit and freely just question each other and oneself first, as an artist, as an individual, as a collective.
Before my last question of this conversation, this was, uh, an amazing conversation in itself. But something that you mentioned in the very beginning, that you wanted to, if you didn't go to this, and you could have studied history as well. You are interested in history and especially
Yeah.
painting also. So in history, in Indian history, there's this very popular series of paintings in Pahadi style called the Ragmala series, which depicts different rags, different seasons, and the beauty of it. And a particular rag is that rag Asavari is depicted with a Naika, and there's a snake in the background that depicts the rag in itself. So, how do you see that
Yeah.
painting series?
I think it's very tribal. Raga Savari, it's always caught my eye, and I really have enjoyed exploring it, And that's the thing also with miniature paintings, that you can really journey through the details just within that time frame. You can really, really go into, and every time your sort of eye will move in different direction. And it's like story, which is like that with every painting, every visual. So here is the scene where, I feel like it's a it's a very, very primal motive of this Adivasi. And I've read also about the Asavari miniature paintings. There's this, uh, primitive, primal Adivasi maiden woman, and in this green, not rain, monsoon clan clothes, and with peacock feathers and the snakes. And so I think it has so many things. It talks about so many. The snakes are symbols of the divine masculine, the fertility, the deep sort of the truth coming out on the surface, because snakes are the beings, creatures of the underworld. So this sort of a tribal, divine, masculine, old, ancient woman, who is sort of clad in these feathered clothes. It's very metaphysical, I think. It's very, very folk, it's very primitive, very primal, and symbol of the strong feminine energy. And it's also, see, what I've learned about the Ragmala paintings is that the way it's almost like referring to a rag. If you want to refer to a rag, its terrain, landscape kaisa hai, pathrila hai, so then it will also somewhere depict how the rag is. Deer hai, to fir wo dodi mein jaise restless nature hai deer ka. So it'll depict that, where the movements of the hand gestures, the postures, the color of the skin, the ornamentation, the gaze, where it is sort of setting the gaze, what's happening, the colors, and the landscape, like whether it is grassland or whether it's forest land or whether it's the rocky mountains. So here in Asavari, I think, if I'm not forgetting, it's the Rocky Mountains always with Asavari. So yeah. And then ultimately, then you also become, again, like I said, with everything, become very personal. It's very personal also. You dissolve all those, remarks and what has been given by the scholars and the experts, and also make it very personal and read it and visualize it like that.
Yes, and we'll definitely have a separate lecture on Ragmala series because it's such
I,
beautiful.
I'm sure there are many bigger scholars who will be able to really, dive into that kind of detailed lecture.
So thank you so much for that introduction to the Ragmala series, and in this conversation we talked about your background and how you know came into music. You learned Dhrupad, and we went into the technicalities of Dhrupad and the form and different parts of Dhrupad in that sense, and also we
Mm.
introspected in some ways on reflected in the times we are living in, and also about the future of classical music. My
Mm.
last question is in first before that also I would like to mention for those who are listening to us right now, Samvadi Conversation is an initiative that we took, and this is the first session, and I couldn't have wished for a better session to start this conversation series, to kind of understand music, to kind of uh, for my generation, for younger generation, to it's like an introduction to Indian classical music, and we would love your support. You can support by sending us suggestions and giving us contacts of artists to invite. That's the way you can support us and to expand the repository that's there, because it's always open for all, and it's on our YouTube channel. People can refer to it whenever they can. My last question is your experience at Samvadi. Did you like the conversation? How was it? If you can tell us.
Yeah, it was very meaningful. It was wonderful. Conversations are so important, I think, because they really help you extend your thoughts outside, to the other person. And that exchange is, I think, very important uh, for us. So conversations like these are always welcome. And I really, really thank you for having this conversation.
Thank you so much, Pelva. And as we requested, if you can, uh, just to conclude, if you can just perform a few lines of a bandish for our audience and for us.
Sure. So I'll sing the same bandish that I started with, the Abhog. And it's a bandish in Bhairav. Um, it's the sai is Jnana Madamate, Jainana Nisadina. Tinako kabahu na hot kumari. It's in Braj Bhasha. It's composed by Haridas Tagore. And it's talking about how these eyes of the master, the wise one, which are intoxicated with wisdom, knowledge, day and night. These eyes, you will never see a sense of pride or falsity or, false ego within those eyes. So it describes, sort of celebrates this, this wise one's wisdom. So let me put on the Tanpura. Jnana Madamate, Jnana Madamate, Janani Sadena, Tinako kabahu na hota kumari gyana mara Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pelva, for that wonderful rendition.
Thank you. My pleasure.
And we have hope to host you again with more questions.
Sure. I would love to be.
And we also would request all of you to. I hope you all will learn, and you all will explore music, and all with that, the spirit of questioning must be promoted in this society that we are living in, which is very essential for any discipline, for any society to grow. The spirit of questioning. So, if we want to grow, we have to question existing knowledge, and we have to break the barriers that we also talked about in the conversation. For more conversations, you can follow Karwaan if you want on Facebook, on YouTube, and on Instagram. We hope to host many more conversations in our Samvaadi series. Please show your support, and we look forward to many more conversations. With that thought, thank you so much, everybody, for joining in.
My
And
very, very best wishes to Karwaan and Ishan and your entire team. And hoping for more such conversations. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pelva.